All right, welcome back to the Outdoor Drive podcast. What's up, guys? Who do we got here?
You got Steve.
Ghost Hunter.
You got Trev. How's everybody doing, man? That was a crazy podcast.
Yeah, it was definitely another one of those sit back and take notes. So have a pencil ready.
It was a great change of pace to talk about fishing because I haven't talked about anything like that up until yesterday. And just to hear someone that really knows like the ins and outs of all, like Steven said, we didn't even talk. I just listened to the whole time because, you can't learn if your mouth's going. And this guy has a lot of good shit to talk about.
Definitely.
You guys, it just took off and started rolling and going just down a deep hole.
Man, I
I was
get excited, dude. I get
No, it was great.
I get taken away with the tide on these because it's just like it's one of those things that like it's like a passion, as big stripers are talking fishing and I don't get on the radio, man. This is like a first for me is to be able to talk about something that I do every day. So it's like really cool to dive in with people that are very knowledgeable in what they do, man, and get that word heard.
Absolutely, man.
It fires you up. When
Oh,
when you feed off of someone else's energy and you fish the same way and you connect the same way, because listening to him and me knowing you, yeah, you guys definitely can go out there and kill some fish and know that both of you are, you're down to earth, you know how to get it done, you know how to mate and captain and guide people. But there's so much in and out of him explaining that, like, fishing's fishing. You got to be out there every day. You got to have tactics, but you just got to be out there having fun and just get you all fucking jacked up. It was so cool to listen to him talk about that stuff.
especially somebody who fishes the light tackle side of it. A lot of the times, a lot of the people that we do associate with are six pack charters, and it's just a different breed. That whole light tackle opportunity, and it's definitely something that's I think overseen. And I think it's something that's definitely in this industry is definitely becoming more of a norm, a better way of doing it because not everybody has six buddies to go out with. It's more of that whole like just perfect like way to get out there and really target big fish or be more targetable to go out and enjoy it and learn. Like you
Right.
go out with your buddies and you just have a good time and you catch fish, yeah. But when you go out with somebody like Mike, you can really dive into the sport of how to, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, man. How to hunt a fish and adapt and learn, and you're more personable. You're more one-on-one level with that fish, that connection that you're talking about. Like that's just, two, three guys on a boat, maybe four guys on a boat, fishing in 5, 6 feet of fucking water. Using plastics and doing 360 works. Working around a reef and doing bottom scan structure. Like not many guys do that nowadays and on light tackles. So, I mean, it was just so cool to fucking listen to this.
And absolutely with the other thing with a lot of these big fish not being around, it's
Right.
definitely more of a technique to try and find them and pinpoint them. It's not like it has been in 15, 20 years ago when a lot of these big fish were just very easy to find and come by, you
And they
know?
hit almost everything. Like
Yeah,
you can throw a fucking a chunk of bunker in a brown paper bag out there and you'll get a 40-pound fish.
for sure.
And nowadays, like look at the DEP docks in Saybrook.
Mhm.
10, 15 years ago, guys were, you'd always hear 40, 50-pound fish getting picked off the docks. And now you hear, a couple of 36, 40-inch fish here and there. It seems like it's never what it used to be. It's getting worse, but hey, it makes you hunt, makes you have to learn, makes you have to stay hungry.
What'd you think, Steven?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. Um, like I said, every time we cut through some of this, it really brings a whole different perspective to pretty much my whole opinion of fishing.
Did you get
And
excited? Like What's your opinion on saltwater fishing?
Yeah, like I want to know your opinion, right? So it's different than what you think, but like, what was it and what is it now?
So you guys already know that I'm like beyond jacked to come do it. And every time we talk about it, it just gets more and more and more amped. So, you know, I'm just ready to go. That's really the only way to put it.
Right on.
Is it different than what you thought it was going to be, like as far as like saltwater fishing is? And I think that a lot of people that are listening to us might not, they've never done it, or they don't understand it, or they don't see how it is. So like, and I think that you would be the devil's advocate for that. Like, what is your thoughts on it? Like, is it something that did you think that going into this, did you think that that's what it was? Or because we've never had this conversation on like saltwater fishing or like what we actually do. We just always talk and brag about pictures.
No, it's very much what you guys portrayed it to be, at least from what I'm seeing. Um, it's a different world than what I'm used to, but the more and more I hear and the different perspectives I hear, it really paints out the full picture. So when I get up there, I'm going to have a lot clearer understanding than I did going into this.
Right on.
Oh, that's fucking amazing.
Yeah, that's
I
what
just
it's
can't
all
wait
about.
to get up here and have the drag screaming and the bent rod. And one of the things that we didn't even go over, we got so tied up in the striper fishing, is the false albacore fishing,
Right.
which is a whole nother realm of things. We might have to, when the fall comes around, we might have to have Mike back on to go through that. And those are
It's
just
just Montauk albie fishing. Is that what you're talking about?
well, I'm not saying typically that. Probably he does more Long Island Sound, but Montauk fishing albies is definitely something else.
That's an experience for Steven to see one day.
Oh, I
Yeah.
hope that he can come up here in the fall and understand that, but it's tough because it's right around the start of deer season.
No,
Oh,
you shoot
well.
a deer in the morning, and then you go out in the afternoon for albies and get the afternoon
This
bite.
is very, yeah, this is very true.
That's funny. No,
For
I
sure.
definitely look forward to it. I think it's going to be a hell of a good time.
Absolutely. Fuck yeah, man. So what's everyone been up to this week, man? How's things been?
Well,
It's Steven, what have you been up to, bud?
well, season one out here for turkey. So carried out through the rest of the year, and things just got slower and slower. But for as slow and crazy of a year as it was, man, I learned more this season about different things I can do to move on birds, different ways to hunt birds. I tried some stuff that I was like, oh, I'll never try that. No, we did. I mean, we tried everything. We threw the book at them, and they got us this year. So it was a good learning season, good setups, good scenarios, good properties. It just, stars didn't align. And, every now and then you need one of those humbling seasons. You have great seasons back to back. In my case, I've had 8 years of highly successful turkey seasons, and it's deflating, but at the same time, it's like, all right, next year it's on. So that's really where that went.
How about you, Ghost? What have you been up to, man?
Oh, I sold my restaurant last week and ended up getting a hernia moving a lot of the equipment. So I took the week off to just sit in the woods and turkey hunt like I've been doing every other day. And called in a couple birds for a guy that I work with. He's has his license. He's hunted twice for turkeys and has a little bit of property. And we went up on, was it Friday? Yeah, Friday last week, and just ended up striking up 2 birds right off the bat. And the guy shot 2 of them, and it was it was just something really surreal to see someone get jacked up after shooting one of their first birds. And I've never knew, I worked with this guy for over a year, never even knew he hunted. And it was just kind of cool. We, make that happen. I shot a bird on Thursday myself, in a piece of property that I wasn't planning on going to, and it was 4 feet. It was fucking 4 feet away. and I kind of missed the first shot. I took his beak off and his snood.
Okay, I was gonna say you got to explain how you kind of missed because either you miss or you don't. But in this case, it sounds like you
Yeah.
legitimately kind of missed.
Yeah, so I have a picture of it, pretty zoomed in. So his whole mouth and snood got taken off because he came in at full strut at 4 feet. And as soon as I kind of leaned in just to look down the barrel, he just put his head back just a little bit more. So he fucking jumped and did some matrix flapping and like flew 30 fucking yards and landed. And as soon as he landed, I shot him again and he was just done laid out. But never had anything like that happen at 4 yards. And to shoot and think you miss and then you get up there and half of his face is gone. It was intense. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's fucking. And then that we went out today with my pops trying to get him on a couple birds that have been really stubborn, and he hasn't been able to connect since last week. And we're just about done, man. Getting ready to put the boat in this weekend and start working on that the rest of the week. So turkey season's about done. I know
Crazy
we got
man.
Yeah. I know we got time left, but it's kind of time to switch gears a little bit. What about
I
you,
hear that,
Trev?
man. I haven't really done much hunting this week. Kind of like coming to an end. Kind of trying to save that last tag for when I come back home. But I've been packing and getting ready. I headed up to the North Woods of Maine, to the highest point in North America. Going up there to do some moose shed hunting for a couple of days. So I've been really prepping for that, getting my camping gear ready. Really kind of watching everything. I got out fishing for a little bit. Did some fluke fishing, checking some temps, making sure the boat's good, tuning everything in, making sure everything's just right where it's supposed to be, and just really focusing on making this trip probably one of the best.
Yeah, it
Hell yeah.
definitely sounds fun, man. I know that it would be a blast to be up there with you, but I know at this point you guys really need to get out and just go have some fun.
Yeah, and it was kind of like a last minute thing because Captain Mike ended up falling and breaking his ankle or spraining his ankle really bad. So we didn't think that we were actually going to end up being able to go. But we were actually he healed up fine and we're actually going to go. I said actually a lot.
Yeah, actually, I
Badass.
think you did.
I was stumbling for my words. But other than that, man, I'm just ready for fishing season, really.
Right.
Yep. Well,
I mean, that's basically
I kicked mine off down here. Let's see, it was Friday afternoon, I believe. I went out and fried the shit out of myself. So it's same situation as kind of what you guys are running into up there. The water's still a little cold, the fish are a little inactive, but we're getting there. It's that time of year.
absolutely. Well, man, um, is there food chain junkies this week?
I'll be posting a really quick clip of I did an elk meat like a elk mushroom stuffed meatball yesterday on top of the smoking that I don't know if you watched any of the stories, but we were smoking some meats yesterday and it's just fucking really getting out of control. We did shanks, pork cheeks, and belly, but then I'm sous videing that now for another 8 hours to break it down to 200 internal. But I wanted to keep the smoke inside, so working on that. But yeah, man, we got these cast iron portobello mini elk meatballs. It's kind of dope. Um, Something that we just had some extra meatball filling and mushrooms kicking around the house. It's quarantine, so we're just using up everything we got, and it turned into a dope little dish. So that's what we'll be throwing that out there around lunchtime tomorrow.
Hell yeah, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was
So
cool.
stay tuned to that.
Yeah, and it was something cool to just use up what we got, not going to the store, just kind of being creative. And I'm sure a lot of people are trying to do that at home right now. So be a cool one to check out.
Definitely. Well, Trev, you want to roll through? We got a few appreciations to kick out to the partners, and then you want to go off the deep end?
Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's kick this boat into overdrive and go fishing. First off, let's thank Nor'easter Game Calls, nor'eastergamecalls.com. Make sure to go and check them out. Get all your turkey pot calls, your crow calls, your box calls, your soon to be awesome grunt calls. There is some on there, but we got some new ones coming out, so stay tuned to that. Broadside Camo, broadsidecamo.com. Use promo code OutdoorDrive10. Wicked Twisted Bowstrings, wickedtwistedbowstrings.com. Check them out and use the promo code OutdoorDrive10. Also, Wild Edge Inc. You can check them out at wildedgeinc.com. Also, we have the Hunter site, huntersite.com. We will be doing some stuff with them. Make sure to stay tuned to them. There's a blog coming out, and we're going to be doing some writings for those guys. And who am I forgetting?
Death
If
Wish
any.
Coffee.
Death Wish Coffee. I forgot that's the best for last, man.
That's
If you're
it,
not
man.
drinking Death Wish coffee, you're missing out on life. It's a reset to life. The world's strongest coffee, fueled by death and fueled by Deathcast. Deathwishcoffee.com. Use promo code Outdoor Drive. So check those guys
Boom.
out, man. Thank you guys for supporting us and partnering with us. And let's get on with the show. Nice shot. Here comes a shooter. Shooter. Big buck.
Stack.
All right, we're back on the phone with Mike from Real Cash Charters. How you doing, Mike?
Pretty good. How you guys doing?
We're doing well, man. Thanks for taking the time to join us hooligans on this ride.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So why don't we kick it off right and turn this key and tell everyone who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Yeah. So Mike Roy, I own and operate Real Cash Charters. And so basically, I specialize in light tackle fishing, and we can elaborate by light tackle is like a blanket term. So basically, I run a small boat, 23-foot center console, just take up to 3 people at a time. So it's usually 1 to 3 people at a time, and we do a lot of casting with artificials, a lot of live bait fishing. So I do live eels at night in the summertime, live bunker. And then in the fall, we chase the albies, bonita around, the blues, the bass on the surface. And then I guess do a little bit of everything. I'm not just a one-trick pony. I even do some bottom fishing. We'll do some fluking and sea bassing. Yeah, I kind of have my own niche, I guess. And kind of specialize in fishing with lighter tackle. We don't do any trolling. And I'm from Connecticut. I grew up in Milford originally, went to Southern Connecticut, got a degree in education, and I started out right out of college when I was 22, got a job as a school teacher. And I started guiding. Man, I got my license I just renewed my captain's license 10 years ago. I got my license. I started guiding in 2011. That's when I started Real Cash Charters, and then in 2014, I quit teaching, went full time with it, decided to that was the time to take the risk. And it just kind of took off. It just kind of got progressively busier and busier. And here I am.
That's awesome, man. So what really got you into it though? Like what made you say you want to start guiding?
Well, I loved fishing growing up. I mean, I was, into it since I was, 5 years old, basically. So I think all my major life decisions revolved around fishing. I just didn't know that it was something I could do for a living, especially in the Northeast. There aren't a lot of guys that do it full time for a living. So naturally, when I was 18, going to college, I went into school teaching. I was like, all right, I got to go to college, and I figured I'd become a teacher because was the only profession where I could work 85 days a year. And really, it was support. I knew I eventually wanted to do something with fishing, and I wanted to have basically the summers off and the weekends off. That was probably the real motivation for becoming a teacher. And then once I started teaching, it was like I liked it. I didn't love it. It was just kind of a career. I was young when I started it, and once I started guiding, and I was getting pretty good at that and having success at that. And I feel like when you're doing what you're passionate about, that kind of success comes from that, and then from there it just got busy enough where I was able to take it to a full-time level.
That's awesome, man. So have you been out fishing already this year? Kind of checking out the water, seeing what's going on. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of similar to last year. We've had a pretty cold spring, but like typically we always get holdover fish that hold over. All the major rivers in the Connecticut area have holdover fish, so that was per usual. There's a lot of fish. There's probably over a million striped bass in Connecticut. I'm just making up a number. There's a lot of striped bass that hold over in our river systems, so that was pretty standard. But now things are starting to heat up. I think we're still a little bit behind schedule, but it's mostly smaller, schoolie sized fish. But the action's finally starting to heat up. The water temperature finally got the first time it got up to 60 degrees in the rivers, and we finally got some. I don't know if you want to call it surface action, but the fish have been hitting sluggos and plastics on the top, so that's exciting, and I'm hoping maybe in another week or two we'll get some bigger fish. Maybe they're just a little bit behind with the colder temperatures.
What are you seeing for bait out there at this point? Are you seeing a lot of bait? Has you heard about a lot of bait around?
Well, like every year, you always have the herring and the shad in the rivers. I guess from what I've heard with the shad fishermen, supposedly we're having one of the best shad runs in years. And then so there is bunker around. I've been seeing ospreys like crazy flying around bunker. I've heard from a couple people, there's been bunker. People have snagged bunker within the past few days. I typically cast now. I'm a big cast netter. That's my niche is cast net and bait. So, if I have to, I'll snag it. But at this point, I haven't really looked for it just because the bite's been good with the soft plastics. I've been happy to do that, and I don't know if there's that many big fish around, so I haven't really put in the effort to look for the bait. But hopefully, once that bait moves in thicker, I think right now it's just starting. So we have bunker in the area. I wouldn't call it thick, but I think that they're starting to trickle in, which is a good sign.
Yeah, and it seems a little bit early too, or right on time for those, anyways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I know, so I fish a lot in the Thames River system, and in the past, the winter season has been really tough for us. In the past couple of years,
What's going
it's
on with that holdover population? Because you guys had the Thames River was like 15 years ago. That was the place to fish for holdovers, right?
Yeah, it was like the sought after place. I mean, people came from all over just to fish that holdover fishery, and now it's obviously the Housatonic. And it's not what it used to be at all. I mean, literally, the past, I'm gonna call it 5 winters, there's literally seen no fish in there. Finally, this year there was a little bit of a holdover section of some type of fish that have been there, but not even close to the numbers that they have in the
Any
past.
any idea on why that is?
I really don't know, honestly, man. Like, I have my own thoughts and beliefs on it, but I don't. It's a weird thing, man. And I think, in my opinion, and I know it happens in a lot of the other river systems, but in mine is it all started when they had put calcium on the roads. I know it sounds stupid,
Right.
but
Okay.
it sounds crazy, right? But
Yeah.
in theory, this is what's going on in my head. Is I'm thinking the calcium and what they had done when we had a lot of snow. They had put it in. They load up a lot of up in the Norwich area, they load up a lot of the parking lots with snow, man. All the city snow goes into these parking lots, which have calcium, which now leak off into the river systems. Once this all started to happen, then all of the winter fisheries started to kind of dissipate and didn't hold over there.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thing that I honestly believe that could potentially do this is the number of poachers. There's big numbers of poachers down there.
Is
And
there?
yeah, and when you get a lot of people like that, they're going in there and they're killing those females. They'll go in there and kill 15, 20 fish a night per person. So you have
Wow.
20 people, you name it. You know what I'm saying? They have like a whole entire, it's like a drug organization down there just killing stripers.
Right.
And I
Jeez.
think that that has a big impact on it. So I think if you take all of these things into consideration and add it all together, then that's where I think the winter population went. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But this is just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so it's definitely hard to say. I know going back to, I mean, poaching occurs on all fisheries, and it's like it's hard, you can't account for it. It's like you don't know how many fish are poached. Like no one really knows, you know.
Mhm.
Obviously, ideally, we'd like to see like zero poachers, but that that's not that's probably never going to happen. But um, the other thing that's interesting, what you said about the salt on the roads and the calcium. Like I don't really know much about it, but I do know I've taken out some researchers from some local colleges, and they have grants to study this. And I'm not even going to attempt to explain what they do because it's beyond my intellectual understanding. But they are studying the runoff of like carbon and different stuff that's in the water, and a lot of it is coming. A lot of it comes from the stuff we put in the soil. So whether it's fertilizer or like you said, salt on the roads and all these different things, chemicals that we're spraying on plants and stuff, and all that stuff ends up in the water. And they're actually researching the effects it has in the water and effects with also with algae in the water. And again, I can't explain it. I wish I could explain it better, but I know that there's no question that there's definitely what you put on the ground ends up in the rivers and into Long Island Sound.
And with that, are they saying that that actually affects the fish in the long term?
Yeah, but I wish I could explain it better.
Right.
'Cause he didn't say like they're not saying that it's actually killing off a lot of fish. But they're what I'm trying to think. They actually coordinate this with satellites. So they have an instrument when there's satellites overhead. That's when they call me to take them out and they collect water samples. So there's definitely an impact. I don't know how significant it is, but I do have a YouTube. I'm gonna make a YouTube video, and it's just when they were on my boat last, just some questions that I was asking them about it. So I'm gonna throw that up on my YouTube page.
What is your YouTube page, just so everyone can follow it?
Yeah, it's Real Cast Charters. Pretty
Awesome.
simple.
Yeah.
It really felt with two E's, so pun intended. Um, and I'll say that I hate. I'm not a scientist, so when I try to explain something, it's like I can't really explain it. I listen to it and it kind of makes sense to me, but me trying to explain it is me butchering it. So I don't even
Yeah.
want to really attempt to try to do it because I'm going to say something wrong.
And we say it in fisherman terms. It's not.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's all I
we
can.
understand things totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it too. I don't know, but it could also push out. A lot of those fish that are in there, and I don't know what it is with the Housatonic or anything, but I know like for the Thames River, for example, they're following up the white perch, and that's what
Right.
they're eating on is a white perch fry. So like if those disappear, or if the water clarity, or what I'm saying, for the pollution and stuff is bad, then they're not coming up. Then the stripers aren't holding over there. So that might be an effect too. But it's just weird how it does affect them that much.
For sure, yeah. You know what I'd like to do? I keep saying I'm going to do this. I need to do this this year. I would like to start tagging fish because I'd
Mhm.
love to see where our fish end up. Because we have, like, even right now, the river, the fish we're catching in the river are different fish than the fish we're catching out front. Because the fish we're catching out front they have sea lice on them. They almost look a different color too, but they're loaded with sea lice. The ones in the river do not have sea lice. But my question is, are they fish that drop out of like right now? Let's say you catch a fish in the Thames River, and the majority of the fish dropped out of the Housatonic. Are those fish that came out of the Housatonic that move here, or are they Hudson River fish? Or I would assume the fish out front with the sea lice, that's an indication that those are ocean migratories. But where did they come from? The Delaware Bay? It's like as fishermen we could create theories about it, but unless you have like real conclusive evidence, it's hard to really say like this fish came from here. I wish I could study that more and really understand it better.
And I think that's another thing, and to definitely talk about is that how important the tagging system is with these fish. I mean, I know there's a lot of schools that do them and a lot of other things, but it's like it's a huge thing to find out. Like, did that fish come from the Chesapeake Bay? Did that come from the Delaware Bay? Where did that thing come from? Where did it go to? What does it do? Because I never even really thought of it. Like when they do drop out, where do they go? Those aren't the fish. Are those the same fish that are on the reefs that we're fishing in the middle of the summer?
What's interesting is that when the fish drop out of the western part, so I say the Housatonic, there's a lot of smaller rivers that have holdovers as well. It's not just that one river. You know what I mean? There's probably a few dozen rivers that have some kind of a holdover population. But when they drop out like clockwork, you'll start catching them about a week later or so, or less than a week later in the other rivers in the eastern part of the state. So I don't know if they're the same fish or what. And one thing that I think that's interesting about Long Island Sound that's kind of unique is we're kind of with Long Island, that we're kind of what separates the East Coast from New England, right? So when those fish come or migrate, anything that's migrating north, they go up to, they come north from Jersey, and then you hit Long Island, which goes east, right? So they have two options. Either they go east and they go the South Shore of Long Island in the ocean, or they could come into the Hudson. They could go through the East River and enter the eastern or the western part of Long Island Sound. But then you also have fish dropping out of the Hudson River. And do those fish go out through, Raritan Bay down the South Shore of Long Island, or are they coming in through the East River into Long Island Sound? I don't know, because we're kind of at like a major intersection where we have Long Island Sound, and our fish could be coming from our rivers. They could be Hudson River fish. They could come through that western part of the Sound, or they could be coming around Montauk or the Rhode Island area coming into Long Island Sound that way.
Yeah, it's crazy because some of the fluke come in that way too. They do the same exact thing. They'll come in that way. They'll come in through like Hell's Gate and then into the Sound, and then you see them down in the western part of the Sound first, and then they progressively start to come up Long Island and then to the eastern part up here.
Yeah, even the bunker. A lot of years, the western part of the Sound actually gets and a lot of times I think the best fishing in that part, like you hear about the fishing in like it's like Hempstead and like Rye, and they get these push of large fish that are on bunker in that part of the state before we have big fish. A lot of times they'll be catching big fish down there, and we're still getting all schoolies in the eastern part of the state.
Wow, it's crazy. It's crazy to even think about the migration of it, man. And it would be awesome to know a little bit more about it. Like you're saying, like where they come and where they go to, man. So when you're done with the rivers, then what do you move to? What's your next step from there? Once this holdover thing's over, then what do you do?
Yeah, so I would say I still fish the river. There's times where we'll still fish the river in the even in the summer and the fall. We'll get because there are still residential fish in the mouth that are coming in and out with the tides and stuff. So I would never write the river off, but. Yeah, once this spring run river fishing ends, I start fishing into Long Island Sound. So usually by June, we start getting our bigger fish. And I would say that my favorite time, or if I had to pick if I had to name our peak season, I think it's actually, I would say July through October. I would say July and August are when we have our residential fish here. So that's a great time to target bigger bass on live baits. So that's like when the live eels at night work really well, and doing the live bunker thing in the daytime. And then our fall run is generally really good because we get a lot of small bait into the sound. So fall run is, we get the false albacore run, we get a bonita run, we have the bluefish and the stripers. So that's a good time for like variety. And if you like surface action, I'll fish everywhere, all the way from Clinton to Watch Hill, pretty much everywhere in between there. And there's times where I'll run across to the other side and fish like the North Fork and Plum Gut and the Race. So we have a really diverse fishery with there's a lot of different areas where you could be fishing.
Absolutely. So when you're fishing the summer, the June, July, and you're fishing the bunkers and the eels, what are some of your tactics? Like, are you live lining them? Well, obviously you're live lining them, but are you three weighing them on reefs? Are you like reverse surf casting? Are you fishing in the rocks? Like, what is some of your tactics that you do use while you're
Yeah,
taking out some of your clients?
it's both. It's everything. And I think one thing that's real important. If you want to be a successful angler day in and day out, you have to be able to do everything. Because I know, like when I started my career, like getting back to like 2010, 2011, like I was primarily more of a shallow water fisherman. So I did a lot of that. What you'd call, like, I guess, reverse surf casting. I'd actually would like to talk about that a little bit
Oh,
after. But
absolutely.
so a lot of shallow water fishing. But the issue with that is, and I think 10 years ago there was a lot more fish around too. So I was fortunate to start my career when there was more fish around, and then as I evolved as a guide and as an angler as well, I really started to diversify techniques, because I think if you want to do this full time and you want to make it a profession, you have to be able to fish day in and day out. You have to be able to fish in bad, whether it's the low tide, high tide, the right wind or the wrong wind. You really have to be able to fish in everything. So, and you can't just rely on one technique. So, primarily if the fish are shallow, like if they're, we'll say 20 feet or less, that's when, if I was doing, typically bunker works best in the daytime, eels work best at night. Now, I'll say this, there's always exceptions. So with fishing, there's no absolute. So I'll never say nothing never works, because that's not true. And I'll never say anything always works, because that's also not true. There's no absolutes with fishing. So it really varies based on day to day and how the fish's behavior changes. So usually shallow water, I would be live lining, and then once you're getting like 20 feet and deeper, like some of the deeper parts of the reefs, that's when I'd be three weighing. And just as a general rule, and this is kind of just common knowledge stuff, but if I'm fishing in the daytime, especially like once the sun gets higher, I would usually stop live lining, and that's when I do more three weighing and fish in the deeper water. And a lot of times I'm a big believer in, you let the fish tell you what they want. So I know if I'm out and I'm live lining, and even if it was first thing in the morning or late when the sun's up, if the fish are boiling on my baits and they're clearly not going to eat, I may switch techniques and try to fine tune the presentation. But if they're not taking live baits on the surface, then the next thing is you put the bait on the bottom and you three way. So you got to switch up your techniques and let the fish tell you what they want. If I know there's fish in the area and they're coming up and just looking at the bait and not committing to it, I would be likely to put a chunk on the bottom and try that. And if that starts working, I'll fish a chunk. But that stops working, I'll go and do something different. So you got to really let the fish tell you what they want.
Absolutely, and especially them being like lethargic fish, man. Like sometimes they just don't want to work for that bait. They just don't want to do it. So you have to
What's
be.
crazy? Just about what you just made me think of this when you said that is, I think a lot of fishermen don't realize this, is that they don't understand how many times there's fish in the area that aren't biting. And it's just funny because maybe it's human nature, but as a fisherman, you never want to assume it was your responsibility. Like you always want to blame something else, like, oh, there's no fish here, or, oh,
The
whatever.
wind's
But
bad. The
yeah,
sun's too high. The tide's wrong. Yeah.
the moon was too bright, and then it's like the moon was too dark. It's like, well, geez, you got to
It
pick
rained
one.
a week ago.
Yeah. So, but the reality is, I know this. I've learned this more and more through doing this full time, and also with the electronics, and particularly using side imaging. I have really good electronics on the boat, and there are so many days when you mark fish, like big schools of fish, and they won't eat. And that's when, and I had this conversation a couple times with surfcasters, and I talked to a friend of mine, Toby Lipinski. He's the editor of the New England edition of the Fisherman magazine, and we fished together a couple times, and we're like, think of how many times you're surfcasting. You go to an area, and Toby's a very, very good surfcaster, very knowledgeable.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
But you go to an area, you don't catch anything, and you assume there's no fish there. But I'm like, look at this, and we're like, look at the side imaging, and it's like, there could be lots of fish here, and they're just not biting. As a surfcaster, you never see that, just because you don't have the. There's two things. One is you don't have the electronics, but also a lot of guys have the electronics, and there's also knowing how to use them. It's a huge learning curve, and being confident in it, and that's the other half of the equation too. But I guess back to my point is that oftentimes, it's one thing being the fish aren't in the area. Obviously, you can't catch fish that aren't there, but there's a lot of times when there's fish in the area and they won't bite, and that's when you have to switch techniques. So you to really be a successful angler, like day in and day out, you have to be able to go from using artificials, fishing them on the surface, on the bottom, to using a live bait, free lining it, to using cut bait, to three weighing. Like all those techniques all work well when the fish react to them, and they all don't work when the fish aren't reacting to them.
So you really have to adapt to your situation, whatever is given to you.
Yeah, for sure.
So you said you want to talk about reverse surf casting.
Yeah, that was just, you just made me think of that. So I think kind of when I started my career as a guide, that was the route I went, and I wrote an article for On the Water magazine, probably, I don't know when it was, 2012-ish, 2013 maybe, and it was titled "Reverse Surf Casting," or maybe it might have been for the fishermen, maybe it was even for both magazines. I wrote something along the lines, and the article was titled "Reverse Surf Casting." So I think that I've had people mention that to me or talk about reverse surf casting, and I think the misconception is that I think it's easy to think that, it's like you're just surf casting from a boat. So you go into the shoreline, and you're using your eyes to look at shoreline structure, and you're casting into that. And that's actually very, very, very little of what I do. If I am fishing what quote unquote reverse surf casting, meaning like fishing shallow water, or whether it's a boulder field or a beach, and I'm fishing in tight, I'm still always fishing bottom structure. So I'm not physically looking with my eyes. I mean, there's obvious things, like obviously like a point, it deflects current, and there may be like a current seam or like an eddy where that's something you could visually see, or like a jetty or a breakwall. But and even when I fish breakwalls and jetties, I'm really using the electronics. I'm really focused on the bottom structure. So, I'm trying to look for bottom structure. I'm looking for marks, whether it's bait or fish, boulder fields, or stripers feed in sand areas as well. And if it's a transition or a depth change, I'm always looking at that more so than I'm really never looking. It's not like largemouth bass fishing where you're scanning the horizon. And I think as a when a lot of guys are going through the learning curve and learning how to fish, and I mean, there's even guys that probably have fished a long time. I think you could quickly want to get out of that idea of looking for like physical structure and really looking for bottom structure. Even if you're shallow water, even if I'm fishing a flat, I'm looking for a trough or some kind of change in the environment, and that's what I'm fishing, not like the beach or the jetty
So
itself.
can you explain it to someone? You just brought up a very good point that you're looking for like troughs and structural differences, but why are you looking for those differences? Like, what is it? What is the gain to finding those differences in those areas?
Yeah, so I think fish. So both bait fish and I guess there's two. You could find bait fish to find game fish. Both bait fish and game fish, they look for changes in the environment. So if I was in an area I didn't know, and you said, all right, go fish, the first thing I'm looking for is, if I was looking at a chart, I'm looking for anything that stands out from the surrounding area. So if there's contours and there's some kind of change in depth, or there's shallow water in close proximity to deep water, something that's going to allow an area where bait fish are going to gather, and an area where the game fish, whether it's a striped bass or a bluefish or a snook or whatever, it's going to allow them access to that. And I guess the other, just say the flat. Like if you're fishing on a flat, let's say you're fishing a shallow water area that's 5 feet deep, but on that flat, if there's a high spot, it goes from 5 feet to 3 feet, and then back down to say 6 feet on the other side or whatever. Just that little change in depth, that's where I'm going to start looking for fish. And that's how you're going to, like, I call it fishing the spot within the spot. So you may look in that 5 foot spot, and a lot of guys would make the mistake of just looking at it as one big flat, and they'll just go and take some cast and not catch anything and write it off. But really, like, the way I would approach it is I would start out and say in that 5 foot deeper spot, and then I may move up onto right on the edge of the high spot. And then if I'm not getting them there, I'm going to look on the other side of it in that where it drops back down to 6 feet. And chances are those fish, they might be on one side of the bar versus the other. And if you're on the wrong side of it, you may miss the bite entirely. So, you have to be able to kind of read your water and your structures. Fish are going to be drawn to changes in the environment. So if you had a structureless beach, per se, let's say it's a sandy beach, but there's an area where there's some kind of trough, and there's some kind of, say there's a current in there, or an eddy, or something different from the surrounding beach, that's where I'm going to look for fish.
And they could also, with going with those high rises and so on and so forth, they could actually change with the tide around those areas.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
So
like,
that,
then that's another thing to think about also.
yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, and this is I think another mistake that a lot of fishermen make, is that you go and you find a bite, whatever, you catch some fish, you drop your waypoint there, and people live and die by those waypoints. I mean, it's like I see people, and some guys are so predictable, and I'm watching them, and I'm like, these guys, they come off their drift, they immediately, full throttle back up, and I can see they're just staring at the GPS, and they are just so keen, tunnel vision, on getting back to that waypoint, and that's it. And you see a lot of guys make this mistake if you're in an area that, if you're fishing with a couple boats, a lot of guys will always, like, it doesn't matter where you are in your drift, they're coming in, if that's their waypoint, and if you happen to be drifting, if you happen to be in the part of the drift where you're near that waypoint, they stop right there. They could be right next to you, and you're going to drift on top of each other. And they don't understand the concept of, like, well, if I just go up current and start my drift 30 yards up current of you, I'll have a good drift and we won't be on top of each other. But people seem to live and die by their GPS. They press that button, they mark it. That's where they caught fish. And I like so back in the fall, I fished with Mike Iaconelli, who's obviously Ike is like one of the most famous freshwater bass fishermen. And he has this saying, and I say this a lot, I think it's a great saying. It's don't fish your history. So a lot of guys fish, they're always fishing their history. So they're fishing where they had previous success. But going back to your point about the tide change, is you take any reef, probably anywhere in the world, but you just say all the reefs along Island Sound. None of those reefs, I don't know a reef that only has one, where I only have one waypoint, and that's the only spot I fish. Like chances are, when that tide changes, particularly fishing a flood versus ebb tide, the rip line sets up on the other side of the reef. The fish are going to move to the other side of the reef, and so you want to obviously there are spots that hold fish more consistently, but you have to be open to, as the tide changes or the wind shifts or the conditions around you change, you have to change with it. So the fish don't always stay on one point on waypoint 301 or whatever it is on your
Mhm.
big fish waypoint. Those fish move around that reef, and you want to be mobile and try to move with the fish.
Absolutely, and I think you're totally right. With people, just they know that spot and they know that it produces fish, but if they go there and then they don't catch fish, then they get mad. But then they just move on to the next spot, and they don't. I don't think that they're all around thinking of the other things, like those fish move on that reef, or the bait moves, or they go in and out with the tide. And I think it's something that a lot of people just don't think about, and it's something that you definitely need to have in your book, like is you can get so tunnel vision, like you're saying,
Yeah.
and then not catch fish. I mean, look at bottom fishing, for example. So like if like when I'm bottom fishing, I constantly, so yeah, I catch a fish, I put a waypoint. I catch another fish, I put a waypoint. I catch another fish, I put a waypoint. But I'm moving up and down on that beach and trying to find those fish. And then if you zoom out and you look, and as the tide progressively goes, they move out or they go in or they move down. You know what I'm saying? And you just kind of got to play to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, definitely need to you need to adjust. Obviously, the fish, it's like the most basic thing, but fish have tails and they use them. You know what I mean? Like they're always moving around, and they may stay in an area for an hour or two, but then chances are eventually when that tide changes or it gets higher or lower, they're going to be moving down a bit.
Hmm. Absolutely. So when you were fishing with Mike, I gotta ask, man, like, were you freshwater fishing or saltwater fishing?
So Ike, he actually ended up doing a. So I could tell you the whole story how this happened. So
Please do.
yeah, so I have a good friend of mine, is one of my best friends I grew up with, Mike Morzini, and he actually works for me. So yeah, I have a couple captains that work for me, and they run my boat as well. And so Mike actually wrote a bunch of fishing songs, like fish raps. It's called
Hmm.
angler music, and
I've heard
he
it.
yeah, okay. So that's my buddy Mike. So Mike wrote songs for Mike Iaconelli. It was several years ago. He did so. I think Ike's TV show. I think it's called Going Ike, and Morzini wrote the intro to that show. Um, so
Okay.
they have so they know each other through that. And then Ike had I don't know the exact details of it, but Ike had a few international guys. One was from Taiwan, one was from Russia, and they were here fishing with Ike, and they were kind of traveling around the Northeast. So Ike had called me like a month or two beforehand, and he set up and he booked a trip with me. For that, he did a full day trip with me. It was in like mid October last year, and so that's how that whole thing got set up. So we were fishing on my boat in Connecticut River and Long Island Sound, and we ended up having, it was a great day. We had a really good day, and it's a great opportunity to fish with like someone like Ike, because he's a professional angler. It's what he does. Freshwater bass guys are very technical, so
Hmm.
as a saltwater angler, you could learn a lot from freshwater guys, and vice versa. We can learn from each other. But freshwater, there's so much competition in freshwater bass fishing that they are very technical with their electronics, and two, with their techniques. And So like like one thing that he's got a bunch of interesting like quotes and things that he talked about. But one of the questions I asked him when we were fishing, I said, like, you ever been in a tournament? And these are obviously the pro tournaments. They're big money tournaments, so there's a lot of competition, in these tournaments. And I'm like, do you ever go to a tournament that you've never fished before? And like you're fishing against some guy that's his home lake. Cause I'm thinking about, I'm like, if I was on my home waters, I'm like, there's no way I would lose that tournament. And he's like, you know what? A lot of times it's the exact opposite, where the guy who's on his home lake finishes very low in the tournament. And the guy that wins it is a guy that doesn't fish it much or has never fished it. And he says the problem with fishing your home water is you're fishing your history. So you're fishing what the fish did, where they've been. He's like, when I'm fishing a lake I haven't been on before, I'm automatically, comparing to, I'm making those correlations to what I know, applying my knowledge from other water, but I don't have any baggage in that lake. I'm not fishing something that worked in the past for me. And the big thing he says, and I say this as well, and I think this is a really accurate statement, is when you're fishing, you need to fish the moment. So like, don't worry about fishing reports. Don't worry about what your buddy did yesterday. I mean, they're good indicators, but you can't live and die by that. You got to fish what's happening right then and there when you're actually fishing on the water.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, because a lot of people live by those reports. So like when they go fishing, they call around all the bait shops and they find out what's happening, where it's happening, what happened. They call around everybody that they know. And we all do this. I mean, I'm notorious for this. Call around your buddies, where's this, where's that, what's this, what's that? And I get it. And then it fails. And if you don't adapt to it by moving to go do something else or try something else, you may not be successful.
For sure, and I think there's a fine line and there's a balance. It's really important for people to try to understand this. Is like, it like you need to know, like we were talking earlier about, say like certain areas, or you could be fluke fishing or squid fishing or porgy fishing, whatever it is. Like you need to know if they're in. It's like, hey, are the porgies in? Like, are they in the Pecana system? If they're not in there, you can't catch them. So you need to know that general, like the fish are in, but I don't need to know exactly where you're catching them. I just need to know if they're there or not. And then from that point, I could go there and start to figure it out and start to learn it. But I can't, if you give me your numbers, you're like, hey, I caught fish here yesterday, and I go there and there's no fish. It's like, well, that's okay, because I know the fish are in the area. So now I start applying my knowledge as an angler, and I start to say, all right, well, maybe they just moved to the other side of the reef. Maybe they just went, maybe it was fluke fish and you caught him in 40 feet yesterday, but, maybe it's the end of the outgoing tide now, whatever. And, maybe I need to move a little shallower or a little deeper, so you start from there, you can start dissecting stuff. So it's good to have a general rule. Like, you don't want to go striped bass fishing on Bartlett's Reef in January. You're not going to catch it. But, if you know that there's fish there in July, say, it's like, okay, well, now I'm in the right area. Now I can start fishing and start looking for them.
Absolutely. Hey, Bartlett Reef's a good spot.
That's Trevor's favorite.
It's my favorite.
That spot was a really good spot. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't now, but it was particularly good when you had that really good shad run in Niantic Bay.
The shad and the porgies. Do you do a lot of live line and porgies also?
I don't, honestly.
We'll call them scup, because
What's that?
I said we'll call them scup, because some people in Rhode Island or the different names will come out, and that will be a bad thing. So the scup.
Yeah. I don't do much of it, and the reason being is because I'm usually doing the majority of my live bait fishing from like Connecticut River or areas that have a lot of bunker, and I cast that bunker too. So I could cast net like 50 baits really quickly. Well, not all the time, but typically that's how I could get bait quicker. I don't do that, but it's something I'd like to try a little bit of. I really haven't done much live line of a scup.
It's phenomenal. I mean, it's the same as fishing bunker or shad. It's just a different type of fishing, and sometimes they might, if you have both, sometimes they might take one over the other, and then sometimes they might take an eel.
So, what do you think about? Let me ask you this about when you're live lining those scup. Do they tend to swim more towards the bottom as opposed to the bunker is going to stay higher in the water column?
Correct. They do. They definitely stay lower, and a lot of the times, one of the techniques that I do is I cut the fins. So they
Okay.
can't they kind of just stay right there. They can't really move that much. So like if you trim off a little bit of the dorsal and then the pectoral fins, they just clip off the ends of the tails. They kind of just stay right where they are because they're kind of like an eel. They dive right down into the rocks. And it makes it a little bit harder to fish. So I trim them and then just kind of keep them a little bit higher in the water column than they normally would if they weren't trimmed.
Right.
No,
They're a hardy bait, which would make them I guess in that would be nice because they probably stay alive in the live well a little bit better.
yeah, they really do. I mean, the bunker, I have a tough time with the bunker because you got to have a round barrel and you got to change the water's always got to flush and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. With the scup, they'll stay alive a little bit longer. The worst is the shad. Those things they die instantly. And those
That's the
things are just,
problem.
they're the worst. And then they
Yeah.
claw everything up, and so I never really was a big shad fisherman because it's just a
Yeah.
pain in the ass, and I was fishing on smaller skiffs. But the porgies are easy because you can find them everywhere and they stay alive really easy.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
Crazy. But you can fish them on any reef. That's the other thing. If you can't find bait, and that was a lot of the reason why I fished them, is because if you can't find bait, porgies, you can find them anywhere in June, July.
Yeah,
You can find
for
them
sure.
everywhere.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
My
You know?
the only my only hesitation would be that I think it depends on where you're fishing because I would think that it, if I and I'm not because I've live line. It's not like I've never live lined a porgy. I've done a little bit of it. I just haven't done a ton of it. But and one of the reasons being is that if I did it in say the areas I fish that or areas close to the river that have a lot of bunker, I would think that the bunker would outfish the porgy. I would see the porgy working better maybe as you get further away, but I would think in terms of what the striped bass their preference, like I would say number one is going to be like it's going to be like an oily fish, like a bunker or a herring. And then second to that, I can see the because porgies and stripers, what's it called? They cohabitat the same reefs, right? They live together. So I don't know if that's their number one food choice.
Right, exactly. No, I totally agree with you. It's like
That's a
it's
great way to look at it, man. That really is because I've fished in Block Island with bunker and didn't catch anything. And that was a very strange source of fish to have out there because very rarely do you ever see bunker out in block or on the ledge. You put a porgy on, everyone starts teeing off. You just read the situation, adapting, and just knowing that that bait is going to outfish everything else because that's what they're concentrating on in the area. So that's a great way to look at it.
Sure. You know what's interesting of what you said about block too is so block is one of the areas where I think I don't want to say exclusively, but it's one of the areas where live eels tend to work very well in the daytime. And if you were out, and I mean midsummer, if you fish, and I'm not again, I'm not saying they never work. Again, going back to my thing that nothing never works, but if you fish live eels on a lot of the local reefs in the daytime, especially if somebody else was there with live bunker and they're fishing it right, you're going to get outfished like a lot to a little.
Mhm.
But at
Big
block,
time.
live eels work. You could, a lot of guys make, exclusively fish live eels in the daytime. They work very well out there. It's like a totally different type of fishing too. I mean, you could cast live eels on Bartlett's Reef with split shots, and yeah, I could see you fishing for a very long time without a bite.
Mhm.
But somebody, if you came there and would properly fish a live bunker, you're going to catch. You're going to catch. But I don't know why eels work so well in the daytime. And I've always just thought it's because there's not a bait source. Like you don't really see schools of big schools of Menhaden swimming around Block Island freely, you know. So maybe that's one of the reasons why the eels work so well. I also think fish there tend to be a lot more aggressive, and they tend to feed. They're less selective with how with how they feed compared to, I think, the fish in the sound and in the rivers tend to get harder to catch and more finicky.
And
Oh, absolutely.
do you think a lot of it has to do too, like with that there's stronger tides out there? You're moving a lot faster, so that those fish may only have a split second to decide whether or not they want it. With some of the other areas, like say in the southern part of some of the big rivers, is they can follow that bait for a while before they actually have to take that bait, and they're not just a split second whether or not they can have it or not.
So it's a good point. It's this is something where I just don't know. And
Right. No, and I think it's just a good discussion. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so what I wanted to say to your point is that, so there's what's interesting about it is that I think that fish in Long Island, particularly river fish, like even we were talking earlier about, fish in the river versus the fish with sea lice out front. Fish out front, I would say, are 10 times easier to catch. Like, our river fish are notoriously very finicky, and there's times when they get very aggressive and they bite, they feed heavily, but typically they're very finicky, very difficult fish to catch. Fish in the sound get more aggressive. And then you go into the ocean, if you fish the Cape and Block, there's techniques there and that work, and fish hammer certain lures, and you could be fishing lures high in the water column in deeper water. You could go and fish the reefs in Long Island Sound. You could cast all season until your arms fall off, and you would never get a bite. It's just they're just a different animal. Their behavior changes so dramatically, and I don't know what the answer is, because also with the currents, if you think about a lot of the currents in the sound, we have a lot of areas, like you mentioned, off of Black Point, the current screams off there. Like it's a
yep.
strong current. I don't why would fish there be more difficult than the fish at, say, Southwest Ledge at Block Island to catch? I don't know. I don't know why there's so much more those ocean fish. Maybe it's a water temperature thing. Maybe those are just they're from a different area. Maybe those are those Chesapeake fish, or they're more of an ocean migrating fish. They don't come into the estuary systems, and they're just a stronger, more aggressive feeding fish. Why is it that our fish, there's times where if where I'm fishing, if the bait isn't perfect and it's not drifting just right, and everything isn't perfect on it, they won't touch it. It's amazing. And I don't have an explanation for it. I have no idea. I wish I knew.
So I used to say this all the time when I was working in the bait shop. Like, you would see a lot of big fish come in from the northern part, Hartford North, right? So they would
Yep.
catch a ton of giant fish up there, and there'd be a lot more of them. But Hartford South, you'd catch a lot of big fish, but not as many. You wouldn't see as many, or they'd be a lot harder to catch. And I would always say, because a lot of the currents up there, those fish have a split second when that bait goes over them, whether or not they whack it or not. And then you see the fish at Hartford South, and they literally, if that presentation isn't 100% perfect, if the speed is not 100% perfect, they watch that bait constantly, and they can decide whether or not they want it or not. And it's just, I don't know. It's just something I noticed in myself. It's not, listen, I don't know the 100% fact of it, but it just seemed like that faster current or whatever it was, especially in the river system, that it was a lot harder to do it.
You can compare that even to say the Derby Dam versus the other part of the Housatonic, or even in the Thames. What is, I've never fished, but there's the
dam,
Green.
yeah, the
Dam, right?
Greenville.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that the only difference in that situation is that you're fishing a herring run where fish are feeding on, maybe they're actively feeding, and those herring are more concentrated. Because I'm just thinking about the bunker school too. When you fish, if you're around a school of bunker that's getting worked, especially if it's a school of bunker out front, and they're getting if they're actively being worked by fish, and you see the schools getting pushed and getting, they're actively getting fed on, you snag and drop a bunker, it's all, a lot of times it's an instant hookup. But
Mhm.
you go into some of the coves and some of the areas where the bunker are laid up all summer, and you could fish there all summer, and you might never catch a fish. It's just those. There's a lot of bait in an area, and they're not actively feeding. But if that bait moves out a little bit, and there's fish on them, and they get charged up, then they turn into a different animal. And I would even say with if you've ever done any chumming, uh, there's times where you could chum fish up, and their behavior changes like a light switch. You could be on fish, they won't bite, and then you get fish going on chum, and all of a sudden they'll hit anything they see, they'll bite.
Is that a technique that you use a lot? Is like chumming on the backsides of reefs and stuff like that?
I use it a bit if it's available and I can make it work. And I would use it in a situation where if I'm marking a lot of fish and they're not biting, I would try chumming. And if they respond to it, it's about letting the fish tell you what's going to work. So if they respond to it, and right away, if you start chumming and those fish, they'll start biting right away, right? Or they'll start, you could throw some bunker out of your live well if you have enough bunker, and you'll just see the fish start blowing up on it right away. Then it's something I would definitely do for sure, because you're changing their behavior, and I think that's a thing that it's not talked about a lot, and you don't read about it in a lot of magazines, but the behavior of the fish has a lot to do with what you catch. Because when they're in you think of a situation that you've been fishing, and fish are, you call it like a high aggression, right? So when you roll up to a spot and you have a popping plug or a spook, and you cast it and you pop that thing twice and it gets hammered, and there's 3-4 fish fighting over it, like, those fish those are high aggression fish. But then you could be in that area another day, and those fish still may be around there, and you could throw a surface plug till your arm falls off, and you'll never even have a bite. And I think it just has to do with the behavior of the fish. I don't know what causes them to why do they feed? I don't think fish actively feed 24/7. I think they feed for a certain time. Maybe it's the presence of bait. Maybe they get bait in front of them and they get all jacked up and they start to feed, and then they turn off again.
And also could be tide dependent also.
I think so. Yeah, I think some of it's tide dependent as well, for
And
sure.
yeah, it's just crazy. If we knew it, it wouldn't be any fun for us to go fishing.
Exactly.
Because it would be catching at that point. And I mean, we try as fishermen to become scientists, but sometimes it just doesn't work out like that.
Yeah, a lot of times it's like I just don't know, and
Yeah.
it's just like people. This is a common question I get as a guide, is when people, because a lot of guys book trips. They'll book trips in January for July or whatever, and
Mhm.
it's a tough thing because I have my general rules. I'm like, all right, if you want to get big fish, book a trip in the summertime. They're like, what tide is best? I'm like, well, I don't really know. It's like I would say in a perfect scenario, you could fish. All right, try not to. You could do it where the start of the trip, we start at sunrise and try to get, the tide where it starts, so you don't fish through a slack. But there's so many times where I'm doing well on the slack tides in the middle of the trip, but I'm fishing moving water. I might be in the river when the tide's slacked up out front, and we're crushing fish. And other year, in some years the morning bite is way better. In other years, the evening night's way better. And then the moon too. Like, if you asked me 5 years ago, I would tell you I was would tell you for sure, if you want, big fish, go, a few days on either side of the full or new moon. I've completely thrown that theory away over what's happened the past 3 or 4 years. I think the moon bites where I fish have stunk, and all the majority of my better days have been on the quarter moons. I don't know why, but now I'm like, I know that I know what to expect on a full or new moon. You're going to have a stronger tide. You may or may not have more debris in the water. If the river's flooding on a full moon, you're going to get higher, more runoff in the water. You may have like in say July, August, September, that you're going to have patches where you have, where the cinder worms or crabs or whatever. So those things happen. But the past couple of years, I don't think the moon bite's been very good. So it's like, it's hard to really predict 6 months out when the best time to fish is.
Yeah, it seems that the moon, like it's like a hit or miss thing. Sometimes it's really good, or sometimes it's really bad. Because I used to be very dependent on it, also. But especially with the reverse surf cast, and at night, for some reason, it seemed like with the illumination of a big moon, that in the tides, that it would be better. And sometimes it's just hit or miss, man.
Yeah, and what's another thing is going back to. There's so many ways you can look at it. So it's like going back to the like we were talking about excuses. Like nobody wants. We all like to make excuses as to why we didn't catch fish. It's never the angler's fault. The reality is like 90% of the time it probably is the person. It's probably their fault. Because here's the thing that's funny, right? So you could say the full moon is not a good time to fish shallow water because it's too bright. Okay. All right, so that means fish the new moon. Okay. The new moon is not a good time to fish shallow water because there are bioluminescence everywhere, and your line glows like a damn what's it called? EDM concert with glow sticks everywhere. What's the right answer? I don't know. I know I've done well in both, and I've done bad in both. And the days that it's not good, that's one thing from my guiding career that I've really changed my opinion on is I just think that fish, you can't really explain them. We could try to predict them. They're wild animals. I think their patterns change from year to year. And I think there's also just flukes where, a lot of times in the summer, I might be running 12 trips a week because I'm doing doubles. A lot of days I'm running doubles. So, and out of those 12 trips, I'm going to have 2 trips that are really good, phenomenal. I'm going to have 8 trips that are good, decent to good, and I'm going to have 1 or 2 trips that stink. And those 1 or 2 trips that stink, maybe it was the weather, but there's also times where we're out in the right conditions and it's ideal, and it's just a fluke. They just didn't bite. Or maybe I zigged when I should have zagged, and I zagged when I should have zigged. It's like I don't even try to explain it anymore.
Gotcha. So I do got a question for you coming from a different angle. So say a first timer or a rookie offshore or saltwater guy coming from, say the Midwest, they're out visiting, they want to jump on.
Yeah.
If they book something with you and they come out to do this kind of experience, some of the stuff you're talking about, how would you set them up? What would they expect? Just kind of walk through what you do with someone who has no clue what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and I get a lot of people. I get a wide range of skill sets on the boat, so I'm pretty much used to. I get guys that don't know how to cast, and I get guys that are travel international destination fly fishermen that have fished in Russia for fish I've never even heard of. So I would say that ideally. I like the summer and the fall fishing because the live bait is great because I could give a live bait. And I'm not making a statement. I'm not going to say live bait fishing is easier. I don't think any type of fishing is easier than another. But I think that with live bait, you got a better chance of somebody that's inexperienced to hook into a big fish. Whereas if you're working a lure, it's a little bit more difficult to teach them it's like you're not going to go fishing for 2 hours and never have worked the lure and be able to nail the technique down.
Right. Being able to teach them technique and finesse is going to take a lot longer than a single book trip.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where something like, you try to find more aggressive fish. I'll fish in those situations. I fish a lot myself. And so I help out. I'll help people out. I'll hook fish and hand the rod off to that person. Now, depending on if you're a true sportsman, some guys don't want to do that, and I get that. So in that situation, you just try to talk them through it. But I think also as a guide, with being a good guide, it's not being a good guide and being a good angler are two different things. So when you're guiding people, you got to try to read personalities. If a guy is clearly a real proud sportsman and doesn't want you to hook a fish and give him the rod, don't do that. And you just try to, give, just verbally explain stuff, and obviously showing by demonstration goes a long way. But I also don't think it's good to overcoach people too, because you're also there to, everybody's there for the experience. You're there to have fun. So, barking out orders like constantly, it doesn't help anybody. So I think some guides make the mistake of they're always on you, and they're like, everything you do, they're trying to criticize you. And I don't think that's a good way to handle it either. You kind of give people some advice, show them, hey, you need to, slow it down a little bit. You're reeling a little too fast, whatever. But I think this is where having the different technique goes a long way. So if you have the live bait, or if you're able to chum, if you're able to do something different to get bites, that's really that I think that really helps you out as well with inexperienced people, particularly.
Certainly. Yeah, having all the different tricks in the bag makes a big difference. Like me on my end, I'm not a very experienced saltwater guy. I'm an inland guy. So working with these two knuckleheads, I'm constantly getting the we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this, and I'm going, okay, well, I'm doing this out here in the river, and they're going, why? It's a different world. So when you go out to the saltwater, picking up and learning these different things, some may be applicable to what you're used to inland, but a lot of the times it's different, bigger lures, bigger sets, bigger boats. So I don't want people to feel intimidated by the idea of going out and doing this, because it's the same fishing, just a different scenario you're adjusting to.
Sure, and one thing I think is that as someone like yourself, or somebody that's done a lot of inland fishing, particularly largemouth bass fishermen, they tend to be very successful with striper fishing, particularly in the rivers, because most largemouth bass guys know how to work a zoom fluke really well. They know how to fish a spook really well. And largemouth bass fishermen tend to be pretty technical, so they tend to do really well. The other thing I'll say too, this is just the irony, is I get a lot of guys that are bringing like a daughter or a girlfriend. The girls always outfish the guys, and I think
Every time.
women are more coachable because they listen better.
Yeah.
Guys are the guys that have the most success. You got to be open minded, and I think it's hard. Sometimes you'll explain, like, you verbally explain something to somebody, but they're not really, either not listening or they're just not understanding, and they're still, you could tell somebody, to do it one way and they're going to do it the other way.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, go ahead, Trev.
No. We have one question here, man, and I just got to ask it is, what drives you outdoors, man?
I love being outdoors. I love I love the ocean. I've always been like, ever since I was a kid. I mean, even if I'm not fishing, I like being around the beach. I like being on the water. I've always lived on the coast. So I think I have a passion with being on the water, around the water. I like the fishing part of it because I like the challenge of figuring the fish out, and how they, throw you curveballs all the time. And then I like, from the guiding side of it, I like the interaction with the client. Because I met a lot of great people. I have a lot of fun with people. We have a lot of great conversations. So I enjoy that more so than me actually going out and catching a striper. I like that guiding aspect of it. I like the interaction with the client, and they're obviously there having a great time, and that's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, you like the passion through the people.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you're putting that teaching degree to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's a perfect situation, is, you take it and reapply it to the outdoor world and teach people something new. It's a great thing. So
yeah,
I commend you for that.
The outdoors is like, people that, I think to some degree, everybody has some kind of passion for the outdoors. I mean, whether you're even if fishing is not your thing, whether it's hunting, or if it's just hiking, or if it's skiing, or whatever it is, I think to some degree all people have some kind of connection to the outdoors. I think there's probably some kind of primitive connection with fishing too. I think there's something that draws us to fishing because we've been doing it. We've been hunting and fishing ever since human beings have been on this planet. So we must have some kind of like primitive like connection with that.
Oh, most definitely. So, Mike, real quick before we wrap this up, can you go ahead and push through one more time where everyone can find you and how they can get a hold of you?
Sure, yeah. So my website is realcastcharters.com, and real spelt with two E's. I post a lot on Instagram, and that's my Instagram handle is realcastcharters. And I'm trying to do more YouTube. So it's Real Cash Charters. I have a little trouble keeping up with videos because they're time consuming and whatnot, but I'm going to try to push harder on that. And if you want to check out anything cool or extra that I've been involved in recently, I was in it's actually airing on the Pursuit channel right now, but I was in a reality fishing tournament called the One Boat Challenge.
No
And you can
kidding.
yeah. So that's on the Pursuit channel. I forget the times it's on, but it's on my Instagram. I know that. But if you go to oneboatchallenge.com, you could check that out. It's a little silly. I mean, it's fun. Oh, we were having fun. It was more of a competition aspect. So there's a little bit of trash talking, a little bit of craziness. And yeah, that's it. And stay tuned. My social media pages, I'll try to keep promoting them as much as I can.
Awesome. We greatly appreciate it, man. Uh, the time spent, the information dropped, it's invaluable. A lot of this to a lot of people is new information. Some of it's old information to guys like Trev, but who cares? So I appreciate you.
Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. I had a great time, and I'm happy to do it. And I'm really happy to get a chance to talk about fishing and what I do.
Awesome. Well, again, Mike, thanks for joining us. It's been a great time. And for everyone out there listening, we appreciate you guys taking the ride right here on the Outdoor Drive.